This is the part of the program where the crowdsourced wisdom comes from you. We're going to spend the next 20 or so minutes together talking about the importance of diversity and inclusion, both in the workforce and in the world. And as someone who writes a daily column about race, culture, and leadership, I know how hard that work is. I know how hard you're all working. I know how hard I'm working to keep up with all of you. So for this town hall, we've lined up a couple of volunteers in advance who will be kicking us off with just a couple of minutes of their thoughts on things. We're going to ask that everybody wait until a microphone comes to you. Can you hear me okay? All right. And you stand up and say your name, because this is being live streamed, and we want to make sure every magic word is heard. So to start us off today, we're going to an old friend, Tony Profit, who is the Chief Equality Officer of Salesforce, who's going to spend a couple of minutes talking about the importance of the corporate role in this conversation, and then frame the question for you all. Tony, thank you. Here comes the microphone.
Well, Ellen, thank you. And Salesforce is really grateful for this opportunity to be involved in this and to be a partner in this great endeavor and a part of this dialogue. And so I'm going to share a little bit of our perspective on the role of corporations and our role as leaders. And increasingly, our view is that the role of leaders more and more is going to be defined by our ability to stand for all stakeholders, standing for the interest of all stakeholders. Now, naturally, we're still going to be judged, we're still going to be measured by our ability to generate great returns for our shareholders. But more and more our ability to balance the interests of our employees and our customers and the communities where we operate and society at large are going to be really, really difference-making. And that's going to be the art and science, of management and leadership, going forward. And so, we really believe that businesses can and should be agents for good in society, that we should be a platform for change. Now, in the first half of the day, we had a remarkable conversation, and it was powerful in that it really illuminated much of the complexity and the challenges. We're in very, very challenging times that we're facing, and many, many gaps. Wealth gaps, income gaps, opportunity gaps, education gaps. So many, many, many challenges ahead for us as business leaders to contemplate. And yet, here we are, and we find ourselves on the dawn of this fourth industrial revolution, and all the hope and all the promises of AI. And so that's great and that's encouraging, but at the same time, we see this deeply troubling prospect that hundreds of millions, maybe billions of people, might be left behind. And that's a challenge collectively that we all face. And so our view is that there is no higher purpose for a business than standing for equality on all of its dimensions. Now, as being part of the tech industry, we say that with humility. We'd be the first to acknowledge that the tech industry has work to do. And we're part of that industry. We have work to do. And that's the challenge simultaneously by acknowledging the gap, but still standing forward and leaning into this as leaders. And so for us, we keep coming back to standing for equality as a North Star, and the journey to that North Star, that journey has 4 lanes in it for us. The first is standing for equal rights. And we heard some great examples this morning about many great corporations standing for the rights of LGBTQ people around the world and in the US, in Indiana, in North Carolina, in Georgia, and in Texas. And we've been proud to stand beside those companies and stand behind them at times as they stand for the rights of equality. That's one great example. The second is standing for equal pay. And this has been one of the defining stories of Salesforce. And like all great stories, there's great heroes in the story. In this story for Salesforce, the heroes in this story aren't who you would think they would be. It's 2 great leaders, Cindy Robbins, Layla Seika, 2 great leaders that stood up to leadership and said, hey, we think we have a gap. We think that women are being paid less than men in this company. And our CEO and chairman and founder, Mark Benioff, having the wisdom to listen and to empower them to get the data. And they came back with the data, and there was, in fact, a gap. And so we made the investment in 2016, and again in 2017, we audited it again, $3 million to make the company whole, to make those individuals whole, so that we could plant a flag of standing for equal pay for equal work. The third lane is standing for equal access to great K-12 STEM education for everyone, but particularly for young women and girls, and particularly for people of color. Then finally, standing for equal opportunity. And for us, that means a workplace that looks like society. That you step outside our four walls, and the people outside those four walls look like the people inside those four walls. And a culture that's inclusive, where everyone feels seen, everyone feels valued, everyone feels heard, nobody feels invisible. No one feels like they have to check some fraction of their identity at the door for fear of judgment or discrimination. So that's the culture that we're working to build. That's our thesis about the role of business in society and the impact that we can have. And I guess I'm posing that now as a question to the audience to explore that thesis. I turn it back to Ellen.
Grant, I noticed you were nodding profusely during Tony's remarks. I was wondering if you wanted to weigh in now as well.
Thank you very much. I agree wholeheartedly with Tony, and I recognize a lot of similar milestones. So we're an agricultural company. We were a scrappy IPO and startup nearly 20 years ago. And the advantage that comes with, 15, 20 years ago, the advantage that comes with that is you start with a clean sheet of paper. So agriculture's global. It's everywhere in the world, and it's local. And our customers are big farmers and small farmers. When you leave the US, in many, many parts of the world, those growers are women.
Right.
And it's women who drive agriculture. So from the beginning, we've focused on diversity. Increasingly, we've focused on inclusivity. So really, really finding the absolute best talent and trying our best to reflect the diversity in our customer base. And we've a ways to go, but we've had a really great start in this. And then the final point I'd echo of Tony's is STEM. And with STEM, we focus on mainly inner cities, and we focus on girls. And we've seen, it's a long, slow process, but we've seen some really encouraging signs there.
Beautiful. We can dig into what's working and what's not working. Elise Nelson, but Vital Voices. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how this plays out on the global scene.
Sure. So I'm Elise Nelson. I'm president and CEO of Vital Voices Global Partnership. Unlike most people in the room, I run a nonprofit. And over the last 20 years, I've worked with thousands of women, 15,000 women in 184 countries around the globe, all leaders. And one of the things that I've seen among these women leaders across generations and cultures and different backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds, they all lead in a very similar way that is quite different than the way that men lead. And I think, quite frankly, 20 years ago, a lot of these women did not want to come forward and say, well, no, I lead, differently. They wanted to, basically say, no, I lead the same as a man would lead. I think we're now obviously seeing a lot of great research that shows the value of diversity in leadership. But I find the conversation that we just had with Ariana, who I always love hear speak. Is she still here? Anyway.
She's nearby, I'm sure.
What I find so fascinating about that discussion is that all the things that she championed at Uber as a board member, we all know she has believed in it and had been championing for a long time. Why did it take a crisis of leadership to bring forth her voice on the board? I mean, that's just a question that I put forth. Women lead differently. That difference, I see, is extremely needed, particularly in our world today. But what will it take for us to go beyond intellectualizing this to actually coming up with those strategies to integrate it?
Let's find out. Blake Irving, you know a little something about crisis and coming in and turning some things around. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Hi, I'm the CEO of GoDaddy, which obviously most of you are thinking inclusion, right? Matt, right? Right. So, if you think about 10 years of repeatedly, misogynistic advertising, that's the company that I joined 5 years ago. Knowing that the only way to actually put that to bed was to acknowledge it in a very fundamental way and then change it. So I had just asked employees a lot of questions about how it made them feel about their employment, how it made them feel about the company. Didn't make them feel good. Many of their conversations would start with an apology. So we changed it. We changed the commercials, went completely the other direction. More than 50% of small businesses in the United States, which is our bread and butter, are owned by women, 58%. Shouldn't you be inclusive when most of your potential customers you're basically ostracizing and pushing away from you the way that you're publicly demonstrating them and applauding them? So we changed it. That was really the easiest part. For you as leaders in the room, I think what you have to do is say, look, what am I authentically excited about changing? And I've been an advocate, oddly, for women in tech for over a couple of decades. So an odd choice for me to join the company. But to be able to have that much impact, change the commercials, become an outspoken advocate inside the company, started something called GoDaddy Women in Technology, which was, we're not going to have GoDaddy girls anymore. We're going to have GoDaddy women. You happen to work here. You're not in commercials. Built that up as our first ERG, Employee Resource Group. Started to have other employee resource groups start to rise up, LGBTQ, blacks in technology, Hispanics in technology. All these groups started forming after starting the GD WIT campaign. And I think this is for CEOs in the room, you have to actually own this stuff. It's not an HR directive. It's not your HR department's job to actually do it. You need to own it. And so I owned the relationship with the Anita Borg Foundation. I met all the leaders of the Anita Borg Foundation, participated and spoke under great duress at the Grace Hopper Conference. And literally, because the GoDaddy CEO was speaking at the Grace Hopper Conference, I got multiple death threats, had to have a securities team that followed me around to make sure that I didn't get beat up. I'm not a big guy. And I think generally, if you own it and you're willing to put yourself out there, you can change the company. You do it from the bottom and you let grassroots things happen like GoDaddy Women Technology, and you own the top. And you own the relationship, and you put yourself out there in a way that is frankly frightening. And I did a keynote in front of the Grace Hopper, at the Grace Hopper Conference in 2015 in front of 12,000 women, and started it by showing 9 different commercials that we had done that didn't represent those women very well, and then just talked about the journey we're on. We also exposed our pay, where we were men versus women by every engineering category, and basically pledged to do that every year, and we have. It's not a brag sheet, right? So you don't have to say, look, these are the great things that we're doing. This is where we're moving forward. This is where we're moving back. Be transparent as you possibly can be as leaders. Be authentic, be transparent, and make sure you're passionate about it. And we've seen a complete turnaround. Like, we have women that are coming to us. 50% of our new college graduate engineering hires are women. It was 15% 5 years ago. So it's making a difference. I encourage all of you to own it. Whether it's that, whether it's another piece, it's yours to own. It's not your HR department's.
Very good. Asher, can I press you into service? So my new best friend, Asher Raphael, who's in the building business, had a wonderful story that he shared at lunch, and I was hoping he would share it with everybody.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Asher Raphael. My organization is a little not as well known as GoDaddy. I'm the co-CEO of Power Home Remodeling. We do retrofits of residential houses. We have 2,300 employees. 2 years ago, we were actually named by Fortune the #1 place to work in the country for millennials. And we just had our first ever Diversity Inclusion Summit. And I just want to explain why we had done it, and hopefully to urge everybody to make a leap and do that for your organizations at home. So the reason that we had done it wasn't because we wanted to do something good. It was to do good business. And this morning, one of the speakers mentioned that CEOs are supposed to be optimists. And I'm of the belief that all of the people that you hire should be. That's like the first attribute that we look for. And the reason for that is that when we come to work every day, all we're doing is problem solving. So it's how do you find the best problem solvers? And that's why the diversity inclusion initiative is so important. It is critical when we're facing problems that we have as diverse backgrounds and life experiences as we possibly can, because it allows us to look at these problems from a different direction. And the fear of what was going to happen at this summit was what had kept us from doing it for so long, which was, these are hot button topics, and are you going to open up a Pandora's box by giving this type of forum? And what I can say is that we found the total opposite this year. I had a room of 150 employees diverse in every aspect. And it was the warmest, most welcoming, large-scale meeting that we've ever had. And that everybody that was present was just happy to have this forum, to have these types of discussions. And you could literally feel the entire organization changing direction. And not just for the people that were in the room, but for the 2,200 employees that weren't there. And you know, I think this is an amazing forum, and I'm so happy to be here. But I think if we haven't noticed it, it is pretty clear looking around this room, in regards to diversity, we certainly still have a lot of work to do. And in thinking of our meaning of being here, the wake that we're leaving behind us 5 years from now, or 10 years or 15 years from now, when we leave our businesses, making sure that this room looks like what America actually is. And you know, for everybody here, I would just say, starting a smaller council in your own organizations and making a leap and a commitment this year to creating a forum for these discussions to happen will only benefit your organizations. Thank you.
Thank you. Good job. So we should talk about allyship, because this room is not as diverse as it possibly could be. Anybody have a story to tell about inclusion from an allyship point of view? Who can share some best practices around that? Oh, David Sutphin. Mike right here. I am really happy.
So I'm going to embarrass my boss. I had the pleasure last week of interviewing Valerie Jarrett at our office, and I was telling a story about Chip, who hired me a couple months ago, and he had been looking for a chief communications officer for a period of time, and I got a call out of the blue from two friends, both of whom happen to be African-American men, and they're like, I think you should talk to this guy, Chip. And I was like, okay. So Chip calls me and says, you know, talk to your two friends. They say great things about you. Not so sure, looking at your LinkedIn profile, that you're the right guy for me, but I trust them, so I'm going to have this conversation with you. So 2 months later, I'm sitting here working for Chip. And I think the reason why that story is so important for two reasons. One is the fact that Chip had some black friends made a difference. People laugh, but it's true. You should think about your personal and professional kitchen cabinet, because if it's not diverse, the likelihood that you're going to be able to move the dial on these things, and I mean that from a gender or racial, ethnic perspective, or however you want to define diversity, probably unlikely. The second is the trust factor. In other words, he looked at me on paper and did not necessarily think I was the right fit, but because he trusted the judgment of these two individuals, he was willing to take a leap of faith. And that's part of what this boils down to. And then the last thing that I will say is he meaning Chip, was really moved by a piece that Ellen had written in Fortune, a cover story article in which Bernard's story about being a young leader at his company kind of transformed the way his CEO thought about diversity. So if you guys have not read that article, I encourage you to read it. So
Thank you very much. Bernard, since you were tapped, maybe just expand on the same theme, but Asher brought up fear, and I feel like that's a big part of what keeps people from building really robust inclusion programs. They're afraid of having the conversations. They're afraid of triggering some sort of terrible backlash within their organizations, and they're afraid of what can happen to you online. You have been really candid in sharing your views on LinkedIn, very popular. You've gotten some backlash on that. Could you talk a little bit about moving past the fear? Or anything you'd like to say?
No, actually, you do. Hi, I'm Bernard Tyson, Chairman and CEO of Kaiser Permanente. I do think you get to a stage where you move past the fear. And there are a couple of sort of life lessons for me in terms of my own journey. The first one is I came to a reality that I could never fully meet others' expectations, especially when they were unrealistic. And when I was growing up, I was taught you have to be twice as good. And I was taught that you behaved in a certain way when you went into the room. Mm-hmm. And then I was exposed to the room. And so my journey has always been the different person in the room. since I started my career. I would go in the room and I'm the different person. So I have 30-something years of what that feels like, where I've been excluded from conversations in the room. And then I figured out how to make my voice known in the room, because I figured over time I got to own it for myself, as opposed to I'm playing by other rules that by definition has been written in a way that I'm sub-leverage. So I think the fear factor is trying to figure out how to meet what I call false expectations. And the diversity agenda for me is an agenda of inclusiveness and understanding the power of nuances. The power of nuances. I am not like you. I am different. My life experience is different. And guess what? As a result of that, I have something to offer. And so I'd rather have 12 different people sitting at the table with me with different worldviews, all clear that we're going to solve a common problem. And once we decide how we're going to go forward, we go forward as a team. Then having 12 people who look like me, act like me, behave like me, and then I expect to get a different answer. So that's been a part of my life's lesson and journey. Thank you.
Thank you. So we only have about a minute left, so we can do a quick round robin if you want to just shout out what you're afraid of, what you need from Fortune, what you need from Race Ahead as you design these programs for the business case and the moral case. Anybody just want to give me some words, how you're feeling? Let me take your temperature. I know, Lee, you're doing good. Anything? How can we serve you? Which is what I learned from David Sutphen. How can we serve you in this quest? Yes?
Cool. Is this on? Yeah. I'm Lexi from a technology platform called Gusto. One thing that I think is a barrier for this, as companies are trying to think of it, is language. And you outline some beautiful 4-point, like, inarguable equal rights, equal opportunity. But I think when you think as a business of putting together a business plan around diversity and inclusion, it would be great to see what is that written down. Like, what are the objectives and key results for making diversity and inclusion a reality? Because it looks very different for different companies, but right. I think it's like one step further than diversity and inclusion is important, and these are the 4 ways it expresses itself. It's like, we made a recruiting goal of X%, and here's how we fulfilled that. Okay. So that would be awesome, not right now, but
I'll have it for you tomorrow.
Yeah,
perfect. My next column.
That's great.
Okay. All right, I think we are actually officially out of time. Thank you for this conversation. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing with each other.